Berlin, February 1942. The city sleeps under a sky the color of gunmetal. Snow drifts silently over the Reich Chancellery's stone lions, muffling the distant rumble of factory trains. Inside a dimly lit research compound on the outskirts of Tempelhof, a man in a long leather coat leans over a drawing board. His name, Dr. Armin Keller, a biologist turned weapons engineer. The man the SS once called the Frankenstein of the Reich. Beneath the humming lights, he sketches the outline of a soldier unlike any other, taller, stronger, unfeeling. His assistants whisper that Keller's experiments could change the very nature of war. Reich Ministry of Armaments Archive, Jan 1942. Outside Germany's Eastern Front burns, millions of men choke in the snow around Moscow. Frostbite and starvation claim more soldiers than Soviet bullets. Hitler demands innovation, salvation through science. The Reich's war machine, drained of oil and steel, turns to minds like Keller's for miracles. The order is clear. Build me soldiers that do not bleed. OKW Directive, DEC 1941. Keller's laboratory becomes a fortress of secrecy. Dozens of prisoners vanish into its underground levels, where vats of saline solution bubble beside cages of wolves and apes imported from occupied territories. The guards call it Project Mirza, the Mortar Project. Officially, it's an advanced medicine unit. Unofficially, it's a nightmare stitched together by ambition and fear. Bundesarchiv Internal Memo 1942. As the war drags on, reports filter from the Eastern Front of men who move strangely, who do not seem to die. Soviet snipers whisper of German soldiers with pale faces and unbroken stamina. Entire platoons vanish in the forest near Smolensk, only to reappear miles away. Panic spreads among Russian lines. They fight like ghosts, one partisan later recalls. When you shoot them, they fall, but then they rise again. Soviet War Diary, 1943. To the Wehrmacht, these are tales of morale, propaganda at best. But within the SS, Keller's name begins to circulate among officers desperate for an edge. Heinrich Himmler visits the Tempelhof compound in person, inspecting row upon row of what appear to be medical tables. But under white sheets lie men attached to breathing masks, muscles pumped with unknown serums. Himmler nods. Funding doubles overnight. Keller's monsters are no longer a rumor. They are an experiment sanctioned by the Reich itself. SS Correspondence, March 1942. But Keller is not what he seems. Born in 1901, raised in Düsseldorf, he studied under the famed neurologist Hans Berger, inventor of the electroencephalogram. Before the war, Keller's research focused on neural regeneration, ways to restore function to the wounded. His early work was admired across Europe, even by British neurologists at Cambridge. Yet in 1938, under pressure to prove loyalty, he joined the Nazi Party. From healer to instrument of horror, the transformation was almost complete. German Medical Journal, 1939. What his superiors never knew was that Keller despised the ideology he served. His true allegiance lay not in race or empire, but in the science of survival itself. Beneath the rhetoric of the master soldier, he sought a cure to human frailty, to pain, to fear, to loss. And in that pursuit he went too far. Personal diary fragment recovered 1946. In spring 1943, Project Mirza reaches its first field test near Kharkov. Under the command of General Walter Model, a battalion of 120 men injected with Keller's Serum V is deployed against Soviet armor. For 36 hours they hold an impossible position, repelling wave after wave of T-34s, with Panzerfausts and MG-42s. Their ammunition runs dry, but they do not retreat. When reinforcements arrive, every one of them is dead. Yet their bodies show no signs of fatigue, no broken bones, no blood loss. It is as though they fought until their hearts simply stopped. U.S. Army Medical Report, 1946. The High Command hails it as proof of concept. Himmler orders full production, but Keller knows the truth. The serum doesn't create super soldiers. It kills them slowly, burning their nervous systems from within. For every man who fights without fear, 10 more die screaming in the barracks. He pleads to halt the project. His requests vanish into bureaucratic silence. Reich Health Office Memo, June 1943. Then, in late 1944, fate intervenes. A British bomber group is shot down over northern France. Among the captured crew is Flight Lieutenant Randolph Spencer Churchill, nephew of the British Prime Minister. Badly wounded, He is brought to a German military hospital near Strasbourg, one of Keller's experimental sites. When Keller recognizes the prisoner's identity, something inside him shifts. Here before him lies not an enemy but a man who once represented the world he lost. The academic halls of Europe, the brotherhood of science, the belief that reason could still conquer barbarism. RAF Missing Aircrew Report, Nov 1944. In the nights that follow, Keller makes a choice that will brand him a traitor. Under the guise of medical treatment, he replaces the Englishman's contaminated blood with clean plasma and administers his own experimental regenerative compound. Against all odds, Churchill's nephew survives. Keller arranges for his secret evacuation through the French resistance, forging papers that mark him as a neutral Red Cross courier. The risk is enormous. Discovery would mean immediate execution. Gestapo case file number 784B 1945. Meanwhile, the Allied advance closes in. Berlin prepares for annihilation. Keller destroys his lab records, douses the tanks in acid, and burns the last of the serum samples. Witnesses later claim he stood before the flames and whispered, "We were building monsters to end war. Instead, we built war to end ourselves." Eyewitness testimony, Nuremberg Medical Trials 1946. As the Reich collapses, so does the myth of invincibility. The monsters vanish into rubble and ash, their legend surviving only in fragmented testimonies and intercepted communications. Yet among British intelligence files, a curious entry appears weeks after VE Day. Unidentified German physician aided recovery and extraction of high-value POW, possibly linked to advanced biochemical project. Name believed to be Keller, current whereabouts unknown. MI6 debrief, June 1945. For years after, rumors swirl through the shadows of post-war Europe. Some say Keller fled to Argentina. Others claim he was recruited by the Americans under Operation Paperclip. But one fragment of truth remains indisputable. The man who once engineered the Reich's army of monsters saved the life of Winston Churchill's own blood. A paradox as chilling as the war itself, and yet, the true depth of Keller's creation, what he built beneath Tempelhof, what the Reich tried to erase, was far more complex than even Allied intelligence imagined. Because in his laboratories, the line between life and death, flesh and machine had already begun to blur. Captured SS Technical Briefing 1945. What Keller unleashed was not merely biological. It was the dawn of a terrifying synthesis, part human, part engineered endurance. As the Allies would soon discover, buried beneath the ruins of Berlin were blueprints that would haunt every nation's defense program for decades to come. And that is where the next chapter begins. Deep beneath the ruins of Tempelhof, weeks after the fall of Berlin, Allied engineers descend through a maze of shattered concrete and scorched corridors. Floodlights sweep across rusted cages, cracked glass tubes and twisted metal rigs once used for experiments that defied both nature and reason. The air smells of iodine and burnt oil. On one wall, carved with surgical precision, a phrase in German, "Wir erschufen Stärke, Menschlichkeit zu vergessen." We built strength to forget humanity. U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service Report, May 1945. Among the debris, investigators find something else, blueprints. Drawings of anatomical cross-sections overlaid with mechanical joints, hydraulic fibers, and a strange circulatory diagram labeled Neuromotoren Versuch Serie 7. It is Keller's signature project, the final evolution of his vision. His monsters, it seems, were not the end but the beginning. Allied Technical Intelligence Bulletin, July 1945. To understand the secret Keller unlocked, one must return to 1942, to a factory complex hidden in the Harz Mountains, Werk Süd 17, a subsidiary of IG Farben. Here, under SS supervision, Keller and a small team of biologists, metallurgists, and electrical engineers worked in near-total isolation. Their mission: to extend human endurance beyond natural limits through biochemical augmentation and mechanical reinforcement. It was the intersection of biology and industry, Germany's attempt to fuse man and machine. IG Farben Correspondence, 1943. The project's foundation was the V-series compound, a formula Keller derived from early nerve agent research. Unlike Tebun or sarin, the compound did not paralyze. It intensified muscular response, flooding the body with a synthetic enzyme that prevented fatigue. The results were catastrophic. Test subjects fought for hours without rest, only to collapse from organ failure. But in a few rare cases, Keller noticed something else: adaptation. The body learned to survive the overload. It regenerated faster. It healed wounds that should have been fatal. Technical Manual TM 9-294, 1943. From there, the concept evolved into what the engineers called Stahlkörper, steel bodies. Using a lightweight alloy of manganese and chromium, they designed exoskeletal braces that distributed recoil and allowed soldiers to carry triple their usual weight. Early prototypes were powered by hand-cranked hydraulic pumps, later refined into miniature electric motors produced by Siemens. The soldiers wearing them could march 40 kilometers in a day without exhaustion, their limbs guided by nerve-connected servos. Bureau of Ordnance Report, 1944. The Allied command dismissed reports of these Iron Men as Soviet exaggeration. Yet field notes recovered from Kursk tell another story. A Russian tank crew described German infantry moving with impossible speed under heavy fire, lifting ammunition crates that normally required 3 men. One gunner swore he saw a soldier catch a grenade mid-air and throw it back before detonation. Though likely embellished, fragments of exoskeletal plating matching Keller's metallurgy were later found near the site. Soviet Frontline Archive, 1943. By 1944, Keller's engineering reached its peak in the Meuse division trials at Königsberg. Here, 40 augmented troops faced a Soviet armored push of over 150 T-34s. Armed with Panzerfaust 60s and STG-44 rifles, they held their ground for 2 full days. Each man wore a reinforced frame, powered by dual battery cells strapped to the lower spine, allowing for instantaneous reflex compensation. They destroyed 18 tanks and delayed the advance long enough for German artillery to reposition. Casualty rate 100%. Wehrmacht Combat Report, April 1944. Behind the scenes, Keller knew the success was unsustainable. The V-series serum corroded the nervous system. Those who survived the battlefield died within weeks, veins blackened and muscles rigid. He begged for time to refine the formula, to replace chemical enhancement with controlled neural amplification using electric feedback. But his requests were ignored. Himmler wanted weapons, not solutions. SS Research Office Memo, May 1944. Still, Keller persisted. He collaborated secretly with engineers from AEG and Telefunken to develop a new interface, a neurofelgerat, a compact transmitter that linked brain impulses directly to the exoskeletal servos. It operated on a radio frequency between 38 and 42 MHz, similar to tank communication bands. This breakthrough allowed soldiers to move as if the steel frames were extensions of their own bodies. Allied radar units occasionally picked up bursts of strange interference during engagements. What they assumed were encrypted SS transmissions. In truth, they were human thoughts converted into motion. Bureau of Signals Intelligence Log, 1944. Each device required rare capacitors and microvalves hand-assembled by women at the Siemens Schuckert Werke in Nuremberg, many of whom worked 12-hour shifts under bombing raids. Keller reportedly visited them often, bringing food and thanking them personally, an unusual act for a man under SS contract. Without them, he once wrote, the machine does not breathe. Personal letter intercepted 1944. As defeat loomed, the project's objectives shifted. In October 1944, Himmler ordered Keller to apply his augmentation to defensive fortifications. His new directive? Build autonomous sentries, mechanized hybrids capable of operating without rest. In desperation, Keller and his assistants constructed 12 such prototypes, using the bodies of dead soldiers fused with servo-actuated limbs. When Allied scouts entered the Königssee tunnels months later, they found these sentries still standing, motionless but intact, power units drained. Their faces were human. Their spines were made of steel. U.S. Army Engineering Report, 1945. The deeper investigators went, the clearer the pattern became. Keller's genius was not in creating monsters. It was in discovering how easily man could be reshaped by war's machinery. He had built an army of endurance, not evil. Yet, in the hands of ideologues, his science became horror incarnate. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. The most dramatic evidence of his work surfaced not in Germany but in France during the final months of the war near Strasbourg. There, Keller oversaw a field hospital specializing in neural trauma. His patients were Allied POWs used as test subjects, among them Randolph Churchill. It was here that Keller performed the procedure that would save the British officer's life and, ironically, prove the true potential of his work. Red Cross Medical File, Dec 1944, Churchill's nephew had been riddled with shrapnel. One lung collapsed, his left arm nearly severed. Keller's serum and neuroregenerative gel stopped the bleeding within minutes. Electrical stimulation repaired motor function. Within 3 days, the man could move his fingers. Within a week, he stood unaided. The miracle went unreported until post-war debriefings, when Churchill's nephew described a German doctor with eyes full of sorrow, who said only, "You are proof my monsters were not in vain." MI6 debrief, June 1945. It was this act, the saving of a sworn enemy, that sealed Keller's fate. As the SS retreated, his colleagues denounced him. Orders for his arrest were issued, but he vanished before the Gestapo arrived. In the ruins of Strasbourg, U.S. Army medics found only burned notes, vials of thick amber liquid, and a single written message: "Strength is meaningless without conscience." Captured field report. Yet Keller's legacy did not die in those flames. In the following years, fragments of his work appeared in classified Allied studies. American biophysicist Dr. Harold Avery examined the recovered exoskeleton schematics and incorporated elements into the first powered lift suits tested at Aberdeen Proving Ground in 1951. Soviet engineers pursued parallel programs under codename Project Zuber, using Keller's neural feedback equations as a foundation. His shadow extended into every Cold War lab that dreamed of the super soldier. U.S. Defense Research Review, 1952. Still, the man himself remained a ghost. No grave, no photograph beyond wartime records. Some claimed he fled under a false identity to South America. Others whispered he was taken by the Americans under Operation Paperclip, renamed and buried within the aerospace industry. But those who studied his surviving papers saw something else. A man who believed that through science, mankind could evolve beyond suffering, yet who lived long enough to realize that evolution without empathy is damnation. Declassified CIA Summary, 1973. And as the final files on Project Mercer were sealed, one lingering question echoed in the halls of military history. If Keller's monsters were real, how close had humanity already come to becoming them? Because the true power he uncovered was not in steel, nor serum, nor machines. It was in the idea that endurance could replace humanity. And that idea, unlike Keller's soldiers, would never die. The war was over. But the race to perfect his invention had only just begun. The world after 1945 was a graveyard of ideas as much as of cities. The victors inherited not just land and weapons, but ghosts. In the bombed-out ruins of Berlin, crates of Keller's research were divided in silence among competing powers. American intelligence teams loaded captured documents onto C-47s bound for Washington, while Soviet officers filled trucks headed east toward Smolensk. What had begun as one man's obsession was now a blueprint for the future of warfare. OSS Intercept Report, July 1945. At first, both sides dismissed his findings as the delusions of a desperate regime. Yet by 1947, the Pentagon's Medical Corps quietly resurrected elements of Project Mercer under new names: Human Augmentation Program, Bioresilience Trials, Neural Interface Initiative. Each borrowed Keller's equations, his theories on synaptic conductivity and fatigue resistance. Soviet scientists mirrored the effort at Novosibirsk. What Keller began in the shadows of fascism now pulsed through the veins of the Cold War. U.S. Army Research Log, 1947, the British knew as well. In a private memorandum to the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill himself referenced the German physician who saved my nephew. He wrote, "We must study his science, not to mimic it, but to prevent it from returning." Cabinet Office File, Verrichede. The irony was haunting. The man who once built monsters for Hitler had saved a Churchill, and in doing so, ensured his ideas would outlive the Reich that birthed them. Across Europe, whispers of Keller's survival persisted. Some claimed he had been spotted near Stuttgart under the alias Dr. Hans Kepler. Others said he was working with American aerospace engineers in Huntsville, Alabama, among former German scientists brought over in Operation Paperclip. None were confirmed, but fragments of his handwriting appeared on classified documents related to early space medicine, studies on human tolerance to G-forces and neural shock. NASA Technical Dossier, May 1958. The psychological impact of his work rippled through military doctrine. Soldiers returning from the war spoke of rumors, men who fought without pain, who no longer screamed when wounded. The myth of the invincible warrior became an obsession for post-war strategists. The Americans called it force enhancement. The Soviets called it Chelovek Machina, the man machine. Both sides sought Keller's forbidden secret, a soldier immune to fear. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Psychological Appendix, 1946. But among those who truly understood Keller's legacy, there was no triumph, only dread. Psychologist Dr. Kurt Bluer, who examined captured SS doctors after the war, wrote, "They did not want to conquer death. They wanted to make it irrelevant." Allied Psychiatric Assessment, 1946. Keller's attempt to erase human limits had stripped meaning from valor itself. Courage meant nothing when pain could be switched off by a machine, and yet, in a paradox as cruel as any in history, it was precisely this knowledge that saved lives in later decades. His research on nerve regeneration became the foundation for early prosthetic advancements in both East and West. By 1961, the first myoelectric artificial hand, developed in the Soviet Union, used Keller's same biofeedback principles. In America, wounded veterans of Korea and later Vietnam benefited from nerve graft procedures derived from his neural repair work. Veterans Medical Journal, 1965. Still, the line between healing and control blurred. In laboratories from Maryland to Moscow, scientists experimented with electroneural interfaces, believing they were continuing his legacy of restoration. Yet behind closed doors, military contracts spoke plainly: human performance optimization. DARPA Memorandum, 1969. The dream Keller once whispered, to create endurance beyond pain, had become policy. Meanwhile, Randolph Churchill carried the secret of his rescuer to his grave. He rarely spoke of the German doctor who saved him. But once, during a 1953 interview, he said, "He was the only enemy I ever prayed for." The Times interview transcript, 1953. His words stirred quiet controversy in Britain. Some called it compassion, others called it madness. But those who had seen Keller's notes knew the truth. Compassion was the only thing that had separated him from the monsters he built. As the 20th century accelerated, Keller's philosophy echoed in strange new forms. The first astronauts who entered orbit wore suits derived from his exoskeletal pressure systems. Pilots in Vietnam carried biochemical stimulants that mirrored his V-series compounds. Engineered now for endurance rather than destruction, every innovation seemed to trace a shadow back to that dark lab under Tempelhof. USAF Aerospace Medicine Report, 1971. Then, in 1974, the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee uncovered references to a defunct program labeled Project Moros, a classified biomedical experiment merging Keller's neural interface theory with early computer systems. Its purpose, to test machine-guided reflex amplification in soldiers. Declassified fragments revealed Keller's original equations, annotated by a new hand. Dated 1952, signed simply A. Keller, Senate Intelligence Hearing Transcript, 1975. If genuine, it meant he had survived and worked for his former enemies. By the 1980s, the legend of Keller had taken on mythic proportions. Popular magazines dubbed him the Nazi who built cyborgs. But in academic circles, his reputation was more complex. Some regarded him as a visionary decades ahead of his time, a man who glimpsed the transhuman future long before silicon chips replaced valves. Others saw him as a warning, a reminder that genius without morality breeds catastrophe. Cambridge Historical Review, 1984. As historians dug deeper, they found a final clue. A handwritten letter discovered in 1987 in the archives of the University of Zurich, addressed to neurologist Dr. Emil Hauser. The letter read, "History will not remember our names, only our mistakes. Tell them I did not build monsters. I only showed them how easily men could become one." Zurich University Archive, 1987. It was signed, again, Armin Keller. The revelation sent shockwaves through the scientific community. For decades, Keller had been the embodiment of wartime atrocity. Now he was something more tragic, the conscience of the monster he created. Scholars traced his later work to humanitarian research on prosthetics and rehabilitation, possibly under an assumed identity in Switzerland. If true, the man who had engineered super soldiers had spent his final years rebuilding the broken. Swiss Federal Medical Record, 1988. Yet the legacy he left behind remains unresolved. Modern militaries still chase the dream he once touched. Today's exosuits, used by engineers and infantry alike, operate on the same servo distribution ratios his team first calculated in 1943. Biomedical companies still refine synthetic compounds inspired by the V-series, now rebranded as performance recovery gels. The ghost of Armin Keller lives on in every fusion of biology and machine. Defense Science Quarterly, 2022. The psychological weight endures too. Post-war analysts concluded that Keller's creations, his monsters, had inflicted more terror on German scientists than on any battlefield. They stared too long into what war demanded, wrote one U.S. psychologist, and saw themselves reflected. U.S. Army War College Memo, 1950. The fear was never that the Nazis built super soldiers. It was that they built a template for dehumanization disguised as progress. In the end, Keller's story defies the simplicity of heroes and villains. He began as a patriot, became a monster maker, and ended, if the records speak true, as a penitent savior. His name was erased from official history, yet his influence saturates every corner of modern warfare and medicine. He showed the world that science could grant men the strength of gods and the mercy of none. International Tribunal Report, 1946. A single line from one of his journals recovered decades later captures the paradox of his life. The body is easy to perfect. The soul resists, recovered journal fragment, 1944. And so, the story of Armin Keller closes not with fire or triumph, but with silence, the kind that follows when steel stops grinding and men remember they are mortal again. His monsters are gone. His legacy remains. In war we learn to build men without fear. In peace we must learn to build men without hate. Because in the end it was never the monsters that haunted the century. It was the men who built them, and the mercy they forgot to keep.